The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Jefferson High's soccer field as Ethan Miller sprinted toward the goal, his cleats digging into the soft earth with each determined stride. The world around him dissolved. No calculus class he was supposed to be in, no disappointed teachers, no mounting expectations, just the rhythmic thud of the ball against his foot and the electric anticipation of the shot. "Miller! Top shelf!" Jason Carter's voice cut through the air like a battle cry. Ethan's foot connected with the ball in perfect harmony, sending it soaring past the goalkeeper's desperate dive. The net rippled like water disturbed by a stone, and for a moment, everything felt right in his 17-year-old world. "Ethan Joseph Miller!" The voice that shattered his euphoria was as familiar as it was terrifying. Robert Miller stood at the field's edge, his weathered construction worker's hands gripping Ethan's backpack so tightly his knuckles had gone white. The man's face was a thundercloud of disappointment and rage, his work shirt still dusty from the job site he'd clearly abandoned to come hunt down his wayward son. The other boys scattered like startled birds, mumbling apologies and avoiding eye contact. Only Jason lingered, shooting Ethan a look that said, "Good luck, brother," before jogging toward the school building. Robert's footsteps thundered across the field, each one a countdown to the explosion Ethan knew was coming. When his father reached him, the backpack hit the ground with a thud that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. "You'll never amount to anything if you keep chasing after that worthless ball." Robert's voice cracked like a whip across the empty field. "Your mother didn't die working double shifts at the diner so you could throw away your future for some childish game?" The words hit Ethan harder than any tackle could. The mention of his mother, gone 3 years now to cancer, taking with her the gentle, mediating voice that had once softened his father's sharp edges, opened a wound that never quite healed. "It's not just a game, Dad," Ethan said quietly, picking up his backpack. It's what, your ticket to fame and fortune?" Robert's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "Wake up, son. Boys like us don't get fairy tale endings. We work, we study, we build something real with our hands and our minds. We don't waste time dreaming." But even as Robert spoke, his eyes betrayed him. For just a moment as he watched Ethan carefully place his cleats in the bag, the father saw something that made him pause. The same careful precision Laura had shown when tending her garden, the same quiet dignity in the face of his anger. The drive home was a tomb of silence, broken only by the truck's engine and the weight of words unspoken. Robert stared straight ahead, his jaw set like stone, while Ethan pressed his forehead against the cool window glass and watched the world blur past. In the house that still smelled faintly of Laura's lavender soap, they moved around each other like wary animals. Robert retreated to his newspaper and his evening beer, while Ethan disappeared into his room, where a half-finished college application sat on his desk like a prison sentence. That night, as rain drummed against his window, Ethan pulled out his phone and scrolled through recruiting videos of college soccer players. Each goal, each celebration, each moment of pure athletic poetry felt like a message from another world, one where dreams mattered more than fear. 3 rooms away, Robert sat in his recliner, staring at a framed photo of Laura on their wedding day. In the picture, she was laughing at something he'd whispered in her ear, her eyes bright with joy and possibility. She'd believed in dreams then. She'd believed in him. "What would you do?" he asked her silent image. "How do I keep him safe when he won't listen to reason?" But Laura's photograph offered no answers, only the echo of her voice in his memory. "Sometimes the safe path isn't the right path, Bobby. Sometimes you have to let people fly, even if it scares you." The gentle, slightly deep sound of my voice fell the silent, still air room of harsher words, allowing emotions to sink in. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, crisp and official looking in the pile of bills and advertisements. Ethan had left early for school. Athletic department, the letterhead read. Robert's hands shook slightly as he tore it open, coffee growing cold at his elbow. Dear Mr. Miller, we are pleased to inform you that your son Ethan has been selected for the varsity soccer team. His skill level and dedication have impressed our coaching staff, and we believe he has the potential for collegiate recruitment. The letter fluttered to the kitchen table like a wounded bird. Robert stared at it for a long moment, his vision blurring at the edges. In his mind, he could see the path this would lead down. Late nights at practice instead of studying, weekends consumed by games and travel, grades slipping as Ethan chased a dream that would inevitably shatter. He'd seen it before, in his own youth, when he'd thought his strong back and quick hands might carry him somewhere beyond the construction sites and factory floors. The world had taught him differently, with layoffs and injuries, and the slow, grinding realization that dreams were luxuries working men couldn't afford. When Ethan came home that afternoon, flushed with excitement and hope, he found Robert sitting at the kitchen table with the remains of the letter in his hands. "Dad, what's wrong?" Robert held up the torn pieces, letting them fall through his fingers like confetti. "This stops now." The color drained from Ethan's face. "You didn't." "I did. And if you bring home another one of these, I'll do the same thing." Robert stood up, his chair scraping against the linoleum. "You're 17 years old. It's time to grow up and face reality." "Reality?" Ethan's voice cracked with disbelief. "My reality is that I'm good at this. Coach Anderson says I could get a scholarship. But Coach Anderson doesn't pay our bills or put food on this table. He doesn't care what happens to you after high school when you're too old to play his games and too uneducated to do anything else." Ethan stared at the torn letter on the floor, each piece a fragment of a future his father couldn't see. Mom would have understood. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire, and Robert felt something inside him turn to ash. Laura would have understood. Laura had always been the dreamer, the one who saw possibilities where he saw only obstacles. "Your mother is dead," he said quietly, and watched his son flinch as if struck. "It's just you and me now, and I won't watch you throw your life away." But even as Robert spoke the words, he knew he was lying. It wasn't just the two of them. Laura's ghost lived in every room of their house, in every photograph on the mantle, in the way Ethan's eyes lit up when he talked about soccer, just as hers had when she talked about the life she wanted for their son. The weeks that followed were a cold war of avoidance and bitter silence. Ethan attended his classes dutifully, completed his homework with mechanical precision, and spoke to his father only when absolutely necessary. But Robert knew the boy was still playing. He could see it in the grass stains on his shoes, the way he moved with an athlete's fluid grace, the texts that lit up his phone with increasing frequency. One evening in April, Robert found himself driving past the high school just as practice was ending. He parked across the street and watched through his windshield as Ethan emerged from the locker room with Jason and a few other boys. They were laughing about something, their faces bright with the kind of joy Robert couldn't remember feeling since Laura died. Coach Anderson appeared at Ethan's side, his hand resting on his shoulder as he spoke earnestly into his ear. Robert couldn't hear the words, but he could see the way Ethan nodded, the way his shoulders straightened with purpose and determination. For a moment, Robert saw his son as others must see him, not the defiant teenager who challenged his authority at every turn, but a young man with talent and passion and the kind of raw potential that couldn't be taught or manufactured. The realization should have filled him with pride. Instead, it terrified him. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday night in late April. Robert had been working overtime to save money for Ethan's college expenses, and he came home exhausted to find his son missing from his room. A note on the kitchen counter explained everything and nothing at all. Gone to study at Jason's. Be back late. E. But Robert knew better. He'd seen the way Ethan's eyes tracked the weather reports, had noticed the boy checking his phone more frequently as the evening games and tournaments approached. The knowledge sat in his stomach like a stone as he waited, watching the clock tick past midnight. When Ethan finally crept through the front door at 12:47 a.m., his hair still damp from a post-game shower, he found his father sitting in the dark living room like a sentinel. "Where were you?" Ethan's hand froze on the light switch. "Jason's." "Try again." The silence stretched between them, heavy with 3 years of accumulated grief and misunderstanding. Finally, Ethan straightened his shoulders and looked his father in the eye. "We had a game against Riverside. We won 3-1. I scored twice." The admission hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Robert stood slowly, his joints creaking with fatigue and something deeper than physical exhaustion. "You lied to me. You didn't give me a choice." "I gave you every choice." Robert's voice exploded into the quiet house. "I gave you a roof over your head, food on the table, a chance at a real education, a real future." "A future you chose for me," Ethan shot back, his own composure finally cracking. "A future where I spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been, just like you do." The words hit Robert like a physical blow, and for a moment the room spun around him. Because Ethan was right. He did wonder. Every morning when he woke up to another day of concrete and steel, every night when he fell into bed with his body aching and his dreams long since buried under the weight of responsibility, he wondered what might have been different if he'd been brave enough to reach for something more. "That's enough," he said quietly. But Ethan wasn't finished. 3 years of suppressed grief and frustration poured out of him like water from a broken dam. "Mom believed in me. She used to come to every game, rain or shine. She never told me my dreams were worthless or that I was wasting my time." "Your mother is gone," Robert roared, and the words seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. "She's gone, and I'm all you have left, and I will not stand by and watch you destroy yourself the way she did." The accusation hung in the air like poison, and Robert immediately knew he'd gone too far. Laura hadn't destroyed herself. Cancer had stolen her away, slowly and cruelly, despite every prayer and every desperate bargain he'd tried to make with God. But the damage was done. Ethan stared at his father with a look that mixed hurt and disgust and something that might have been pity. If you choose that ball over your family, if you choose some impossible dream over the life I'm trying to build for us, then don't call me Dad anymore. The silence that followed was absolute. Ethan nodded once, very slowly, then turned and walked up the stairs. Robert heard the sounds of movement in his son's room, the opening and closing of drawers, the rustle of clothing being packed. An hour later, Ethan came back downstairs with a duffel bag swung over his shoulder and his cleats tied together by their laces. He paused in the doorway of the living room, where Robert still sat in his chair like a statue carved from stone. "I love you, Dad, but I can't be the person you want me to be." The front door closed with a soft click that seemed to echo through the house like a gunshot. Robert sat alone in the dark for a long time, surrounded by the ghosts of his wife and son, wondering how love could feel so much like loss. 5 years passed like seasons changing, each one carrying Robert further from that April night when his son walked out their front door. He heard about Ethan in fragments, third-hand stories from neighbors who'd heard from friends who'd seen updates on social media. Community college first, working nights at a warehouse to pay for tuition and field fees. Then a transfer to state, a partial scholarship, more stories of late-night practices and weekend tournaments. Robert kept a newspaper clipping in his wallet, yellowed at the edges from handling. "Local player makes Division I roster," the headline read, above a photo of Ethan in his university uniform, his face serious and determined beneath the stadium lights. He'd found it by accident at the barbershop, and Mike had pretended not to notice when Robert carefully tore it out and folded it into his pocket. The house felt cavernous without Ethan's presence. Robert had taken to eating dinner standing at the kitchen counter, finding the dining table too large and too quiet for one person. He kept Ethan's room exactly as his son had left it, though he couldn't have said why. Sometimes, when the loneliness became too much to bear, he would stand in the doorway and remember the sound of Ethan's voice, the way the boy had argued with such passion about things Robert couldn't understand. "You're a stubborn fool, Bobby," Laura's voice whispered in his memory, "and you're going to lose him completely if you don't swallow your pride." But pride was all Robert had left. That and the growing certainty that he'd made the right choice, even if it felt like dying a little more each day. Ethan was surviving without him, maybe even thriving. The newspaper clippings he secretly collected painted a picture of a young man who was building the life he'd dreamed of, one goal at a time. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday in November, addressed in handwriting he recognized immediately, despite the years that had passed. Robert's hands trembled as he opened the envelope, finding inside a single ticket to a professional soccer match and a brief note written in Ethan's careful script. "Dad, I made the team. First game is Saturday at 2 p.m., Section 12, Row C, Seat 18. I hope you can make it. Love, Ethan." Robert stared at the ticket for a long time, this small piece of cardboard that represented everything he tried to protect his son from: professional soccer, the dream that had torn their family apart, the impossible path that his stubborn, passionate boy had somehow managed to walk. On Saturday morning, Robert stood in front of his bathroom mirror and tried to decide whether he was brave enough to go. The man looking back at him had aged more than 5 years should have allowed. His hair was silver now, his face lined with grief and regret. His hands, once so sure and strong, shook slightly as he knotted his tie. What would Laura do? He asked the empty house. But he already knew the answer. The stadium was a cathedral of noise and color, filled with thousands of people who understood something Robert had spent 5 years trying to deny. He made his way to Section 12 slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird. Row C, Seat 18, was exactly where Ethan had said it would be, with a perfect view of the field. Robert sat down carefully, aware of every eye that might be watching him, every person who might recognize the resemblance between him and the young man warming up on the grass below. When the teams took the field for the opening ceremony, Robert found himself scanning the players' faces until he spotted number 23. Ethan had grown in the years they'd been apart, taller, broader through the shoulders, with the confident bearing of a man who'd earned his place in the world. But when he smiled at something one of his teammates said, Robert saw the boy who'd once spent hours in the backyard juggling a ball with the focused intensity of a monk at prayer. The game began with a roar from the crowd that seemed to shake the very air. Robert had never understood soccer, had never tried to learn its rhythms and strategies, But as he watched Ethan move across the field with fluid grace, he began to see what his son had always seen. Not just a game, but a language of movement and possibility, a way of speaking that didn't require words. In the 34th minute, Ethan took a pass near midfield and began to run. Robert found himself standing without conscious thought, his hands gripping the railing as his son wove through defenders like water flowing around stones. The crowd's noise faded to a whisper in his ears, and for a moment, it was just him and Ethan and the impossible beauty of the moment unfolding below. The shot was perfect, a curve of the ball that seemed to bend the laws of physics, sailing past the goalkeeper's outstretched hands and nestling into the corner of the net like it had always belonged there. The stadium erupted, but Robert heard only the sound of his own heartbeat and the echo of his wife's voice. "Look at him, Bobby. Look at what he's become." As Ethan celebrated with his teammates, he turned toward the stands, his eyes searching. When their gazes met across the distance, father and son looked at each other for the first time in 5 years. Ethan raised his hand in a small wave, and Robert felt tears he'd been holding back for half a decade finally break free. After the game, a 2-1 victory that sent the crowd home happy and hoarse, Robert made his way down to field level. His legs felt unsteady beneath him, each step carrying him closer to a conversation he'd been avoiding for far too long. Ethan emerged from the tunnel in street clothes, his hair still damp from the shower. He looked older than Robert had expected, with lines around his eyes that spoke of early mornings and late nights, of a dream pursued with single-minded determination. But when he smiled, he was still the boy who'd once asked his father to play catch in the backyard. They stood facing each other on the empty field, surrounded by the debris of celebration. Confetti and programs scattered by the wind, the echo of joy slowly fading into silence. Robert opened his mouth to speak, to offer the apology that had been building in his throat for 5 years, but no words came. Instead, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around his son, holding him tight against his chest. Ethan stiffened for a moment, then relaxed into the embrace, and Robert felt something inside him unlock for the first time since Laura died. "I'm sorry," he whispered into Ethan's shoulder. "I'm so damn sorry." Ethan's arms tightened around him. "I know, Dad. I know." They held each other as the stadium lights began to dim. Two men who'd spent too many years speaking different languages, finally finding their way back to each other. When they finally stepped apart, Robert saw that Ethan's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "She would have been so proud," Robert said quietly. "She is proud," Ethan replied. "Wherever she is, she's proud of both of us." They walked slowly across the field together, father and son, their shadows long in the fading light. Behind them, the scoreboard still glowed with the final score, but ahead of them stretched something more valuable than any victory, the possibility of tomorrow and all the tomorrows that would follow. Robert had spent 5 years believing that love meant holding on, that protection required walls and boundaries and the crushing of dangerous dreams. But as they reached the tunnel that would take them back to the world beyond the stadium, he finally understood what Laura had been trying to tell him all along. Sometimes love means letting go. Sometimes it means having faith in the person you've raised, even when the path they choose terrifies you. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it means finding your way back to each other when the game is over and the lights are dim, ready to begin again. The field was empty now, but the grass still held the memory of triumph and the promise of tomorrow's games. And in the distance, barely audible above the city's hum, Robert could swear he heard the sound of Laura laughing, her joy bright as stadium lights in the November dark.